Today's daf is daf Chaf Beis 22, and we are at the bottom of Chaf Aleph Amud Beis. Yesterday we saw a machlokas between Chizkiah and Rabbi Abo. Chizkiah says that we know that chametz is not only prohibited to be eaten on Pesach, but it is also prohibited to have benefit from. It's asur bahana. Rabbi Abo says it's true, but this is not a specific thing to chametz. Every time the Torah says, lo sochel, you shall not eat it, lo yochal, you will not eat it, lo sochlu, they shall not eat it, it means echad is achila v'echad is ana, both a prohibition to eat it as well as a prohibition to benefit from it. It's a general rule. Rabbi Chizkiah learned it specifically to Pesach, where it says lo yeyachel chametz. It doesn't say lo yochal chametz, you shall not eat chametz, but lo yeyachel, you shall not. It's reflexive. It shall not be eaten, to tell you that any chametz cannot in any way help you eat. Meaning, it cannot give you benefit. It cannot give you financial gain. You cannot barter it, and you cannot sell it. Whereas Rabbi Abo said that it's a general rule. And he learned it from the fact that by nevela, the Torah said that don't eat nevela. Nevela is an animal that was not shechted in order to a dead animal that was not shechted properly, and so either died on its own or was shechted but incorrectly. So that would be nevela. And you're not allowed to eat it. And there the Torah specifically said you shall give it to the ger toshav, the non-Jew who lives amongst you and accepted to not do idolatry, or sell it to the nachri, generally to the non-Jew, to the foreigner. The fact that the Torah specifically tells you that you can benefit from it, that not only the Torah could have just said lo yochal, don't eat nevela, since the Torah said lo sochel kol nevela, and then it said you can give it to your neighbor or sell it to someone else. That tells you that you're allowed to benefit from it, and therefore it must be that lo sechlu itself would have meant you cannot benefit from it. However, we saw yesterday at the end of the daf that there was a machlokes between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda of whether or not this is specific, that you have to either sell it to a foreigner or gift it to your neighbor, and that would be the preference, to gift it to your neighbor who is not Jewish, who is a ger toshav. And the Gemara is going to say, well, if that's true, then how do we know that lo sochlu is there to tell you generally a prohibition and benefit? And from the fact that the Torah specifically told you that you're allowed to benefit from nevela by gifting it to your neighbor or selling it to someone, maybe there it's to tell you that you should gift it to a ger toshav and only sell it to a non-Jew, to someone else. Now, according to Rabbi Meir, who had said, no, you can sell it to your neighbor, you can gift it to your neighbor, you can sell it to someone else, you can gift it to someone else. And the Torah is telling you that there's a preference of some sort to give to the ger toshav, who's your neighbor, because we're obligated in taking care of the ger toshav, the non-Jew who accepts to live without avodah zarah, as our neighbor. So we have to take care of them, and so it's a preference to give to him. But really, halachically, you can do whatever you want with it. So therefore, indeed, the fact that the Torah said, don't eat it, and then the Torah said you're allowed to benefit from it, indicates that generally when the Torah says don't eat it, it means don't benefit. However, according to Rabbi Yehuda, that's not true. So that's where you're going to begin. This is 7-8 lines from the bottom of Chaf Aleph Amud Beis. Bishlam el Rabbi Meir. So according to Rabbi Meir, we understand the Amar echad ger ve'echad nachri, regardless of whether it's a ger toshav or just a foreigner. Bein lemechira bein menasin, I can gift it to either one. I can sell it to either one. So really, there's no need for the Torah to tell me any of this, because I can do whatever I want with it, essentially. So since the Torah specifically says I'm allowed to benefit from the nevela, so that indicates that without this, when the Torah says lo sochlu, do not eat it, it means don't benefit unless the Torah specifically gave permission to benefit. Ela Rabbi Yehuda, but according to Rabbi Yehuda, who says that no, it's specific. The Torah is coming to tell you that gift it to a geratoshav or sell it to someone else, but there's a specific mitzvah there to gift it to a geratoshav, and then if not, to sell it to someone else. So then I need this mitzvah. The Torah is not just telling me that I'm allowed to benefit from it. The Torah is telling me a specific way to benefit from it. So it doesn't indicate that there is a prohibition of benefit. It just indicates that the benefit I'm allowed to have in any case has a specific way to benefit from. So how do I know generally when the Torah says lo sochel, lo sochlu, or lo yochlu, lo yochal, that it means a prohibition of eating and a prohibition of benefit? So nafkele mekelev tashlichan oso. The Torah says by basa basada treifa, if you find meat outside of its place, treifa, then is considered it was torn apart, and a terefa may not be eaten. And there it says lakelev tashlichan oso. Besides the Torah saying that you're not allowed to eat benefit, you're not allowed to eat from this. Torah says, oh, and you're allowed to feed it to dogs, give it to dogs. So obviously giving it to a dog is a benefit. And the Torah says, lakelev tashlichan oso. And the Gemara goes to Chaf Beis Amud Beis, Lamed Aleph 22a. This particular meat, terefa, and what is outside of its place, basar basada, meat out in the field, that the Torah says is something you're going to give to the dogs. Now, dogs in and of itself, Rashi brings, the pasuk says that in Mitzrayim, during the Makas Bechoros, the death of the firstborn, the dogs remained silent. Lo yechratz kelev l'shoner. And as a reward, trefa meat is given to the Torah specifically says give it to dogs. However, that benefit would not that calculation would not suffice to explain why the Torah says to give it to dogs, because the Torah adds the word say this particularly you give to dogs, which tells us other prohibited foods you're not allowed to give to dogs because you're not allowed to benefit from them. The Rabbi Meir, however, Rabbi Meir, who he says that we already know, for Rabbi Meir, that we already know that the Torah is prohibiting, when the Torah prohibits something to be eaten, it also prohibits foods to be benefited from, as we see from Nevela. So what does he need this word osayit for? You only give to dogs terefa meat. Now, the wording of the Torah by terefa is unique, because the Torah says ubasar basada terefa loisachelu. It should say ubasar terefa, meat that was torn apart, meaning an animal that is dying, as opposed to what it says ubasar basada terefa, meat out in the field terefa. What is out in the field meat? And the Gemara in Kollel teaches us that it means any meat that's outside of its borders. And one halacha we learn is that if an animal, while being shechted, was pregnant, and the fetus stuck out a leg while the shechita was going on, so that was not inside and a part of the mother at the time of the shechita. So that part's considered trefa and has to be cut off. It may not be eaten. And the same idea of borders of the animal being outside and being prohibited would be kachim that comes out of the Beis Hamikdash, or chulin, mundane animals that are brought into the Beis Hamikdash. So chulin shenishchata ba'azara, and for that would be excluded from this idea. And basar basada treifa, that which is out, that you could give to dogs, and not chula shenishchata ba'azara, which was brought in also out of its boundaries, but into the Beis Hamikdash, and that you cannot benefit from and not give to dogs. V'idach and Rabbi Yehuda, he disagrees with the concept of prohibition of benefit for a mundane animal that was shechted in the Beis Hamikdash. He says actually that's not prohibited in benefit. That's the way Rashi learns that even though it's prohibited on a Torah level, the prohibition of benefit there is rabbinic, and therefore Isa is not coming to limit that. So what is it coming to limit? Only what's included in this verse you're allowed to give to dogs, but anything else that's prohibited to be eaten is also prohibited in benefit. So we now have two sources for Rabbi Abba's general rule. Rabbi Abba's general rule is anytime the Torah says a prohibition to eat something, it includes a prohibition to benefit from it. Either from the fact that the Torah specifically, after saying you're not allowed to eat nevela, then went ahead and tell you you're allowed to gift it or sell it to anybody. And by doing so, the Torah had to specifically put it back into the give permission to benefit from it, or from Terefa, and it's included prohibitions where the Torah says this you may give to the dog or give to the dog to eat, meaning other things that are prohibited in benefit, you're not even allowed to give to a dog. You're not allowed to benefit. Other things that are prohibited to eat, you're not even allowed to give to a dog because you're not allowed to benefit from it. Well, how are we then going to explain Gid Hanasha? Gid Hanasha is the sciatic nerve, the sinew that's prohibited. Torah, we learned that a few weeks ago in the Parsha, after the Yaakov wrangled with the Malach of Esav, with the angel of Esav, he then caused him to limp by pulling on his hip socket and dislocated this nerve or this sinew. And the Torah says you're not allowed to eat. Therefore, Bnei Yisrael may not eat the Gid Hanasha. The Rachmana Amal Kein Lo Yochlu Bnei Yisrael as Gid Hanasha, not to eat the Gid Hanasha, which would indicate, based on Rabbi Abba, that you're also not allowed to benefit from it. Utanan, and yet we learned in the Mishnah, Shalech Adam Yerech LeNachri v'Gid Hanasha B'Sorcha. You're allowed to gift a thigh of an animal, a hind quarter of an animal, to a non-Jew, in spite of the fact that the Gid Hanasha is in there, and we're not concerned that if somebody sees that the Jew is the one that sold it to the non-Jew and may buy a portion, and it's going to be cheaper, and so we're not concerned that a Jew is going to end up buying the Gid Hanasha there. Because you know exactly where the Gid Hanasha is, and it's hard to take it out, and you sort of can tell whether it's been cut out or not because it really chops up the meat and cuts it up into pieces. And so the concern that somebody's going to think that the Gid Hanasha has been removed because it came from a Jew's house and he sold it to the non-Jew is not really a concern, because the Gid Hanasha, you can recognize it's still there. In any case, what you see is that you're allowed to sell it. You're allowed to benefit from it. You're allowed to gift it to someone. But it says lo yochlu. It says you're not allowed to eat it. So Gemara says, Rabbi Abba says, no, wait. The Torah said you're not allowed to eat nevela, an animal that isn't shechted. Included in that are all parts of the nevela, including the chelev, the forbidden fats, and including the Gid Hanasha, which are prohibited as a part of the animal and as part of nevela. And the Torah says you're allowed to gift the nevela, benefit from the nevela, so you're allowed to benefit from the fats and from the gid. The Gemara is now going to introduce a machlokas which exists in Chulin, and then explain that according to that one opinion, that machlokas, that wouldn't work. The sinew really is a nearly tasteless food, and there's a machlokas of whether yesh begidim and nosim tam. Does this sinew have enough flavor to prohibit its infused flavor to anything else when you cook it, and so it gives off flavor, or really it doesn't give off flavor? And the idea is that typically we say something counts as a food and not just chewing on wood if it gives off flavor. And therefore, there are certain things that even though that they are prohibited as a part of the Torah prohibition, since they're not edible and don't give off any flavor, they would not be a part of the prohibition of nevela and treifa and non-kosher animals. So technically speaking, one may have been allowed to chew on raw hide of a non-kosher animal. So somebody has a football they want to chew on, then that would technically perhaps be permissible because it's not edible. There's no flavor there. So there's an opinion that says that yesh begidim and tam. No, gid anosha has enough flavor that it's going to give off. This sinew is going to give off some flavor. So then it makes sense when the Torah prohibited nevela and says don't eat nevela. Aside from the prohibition of the forbidden fats, there's also a prohibition of nevela. And when the Torah said it's permissible, the nevela is permissible to benefit from, it includes that you're allowed to benefit from the forbidden fats because that's included in the prohibition. Same would be true if the sinew, if the gid anasha gives off flavor, so then it's included in the prohibition of nevela. And now you don't have the prohibition of benefit from nevela. And that would mean you're also allowed to benefit from the gid hanasha. So then when the Torah said you're allowed to gift it to your neighbor, you're allowed to gift it or sell it to someone else, it means you're allowed to just benefit from the nevela. It includes the benefit of the gid hanasha, of the sinew. However, if we say that gid hanasha has no flavor, that means it was never included in the prohibition of nevela of eating it because it's not considered eating. And therefore, when the Torah then said, oh, you're not allowed to eat nevela, but you are allowed to benefit from it, the sinew is not included in that conversation because it's not included in prohibition. There is a specific prohibition of gid hanasha, but that's not included in the prohibition of nevela general of the entire animal. It's specific to that sinew. Even though it doesn't give off flavor, nevertheless, it's prohibited. And there I wouldn't know that the Torah then put it back into permission to benefit from it. So Gemara says, so this would all make sense according to the opinion that yesh begidim and tam, that the sinew does give off a benefit, a flavor. So then it's included in prohibition of eating nevela. And when the Torah says you're allowed to benefit from nevela, it's included in that as well. And so I know the sinew you're allowed to benefit from. Which is a halacha that you're not allowed to, that there is no flavor coming from the sinew, and yet the Torah prohibited it. But it's an independent prohibition. It's not included in the prohibition of nevela, just as like raw hides would not be included because they're not edible. So so where do you know? How do you know that gid hanasha is allowed to be benefited from? And where it says, wait, man shamas le'dama ein begidim and tam. Rabbi Shimon, whose opinion is this that sinews don't give off flavor and therefore they're not really included in prohibition and nevela? It's Rabbi Shimon, the Tanya, as we learned. Ha'ochel migid hanasha. Somebody that eats from the sinew, from the forbidden fats, shall behema tamea of a not forbidden fats, forbidden sinew, from a non-kosher animal. So, say from a pig. Rabbi Yehuda Machayev Shtayim. Rabbi Yehuda says you transgressed two prohibitions. One, because you ate the sinew, and two, because you ate non-kosher animal. Rabbi Shimon Poiter. And Rabbi Shimon actually says there's no prohibition at all because it's prohibited to do, but you've not transgressed either because it's not the non-kosher animal. It's not considered. You didn't even eat that because the Torah prohibits you from eating something that's meat, something that's edible. If it's the fact and the gid hanasha as well, the Torah says don't eat the gid, which indicates of a meat that you're allowed to eat. But if I'm not allowed to eat the meat, the gid is not prohibited at all. And according to Rabbi Shimon, indeed, the gid hanasha is prohibited in benefit as well. Rabbi Shimon Hachanami, the Aser Ba'ana, that the Gid Hanasha is indeed prohibited not only in food and eating, but also in benefit. The Tani we learned, Gid Hanasha Mutar Ba'ana different Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says you're allowed to benefit from the Gid Hanasha. And again, this will make sense according to Rabbi Yehuda, who says that the Gid has flavor. So it's included in the Nevela prohibition as well. And when the Torah says you're allowed to benefit from the Nevela, it means you're allowed to benefit from the Gid Hanasha. However, Rabbi Shimon says you're not allowed to benefit from the Gid Hanasha. So indeed, not only you're not allowed to eat it, but also you're not allowed to benefit from it. And this would actually help Rabbi Abba support his idea that when the Torah says a prohibition in eating, you're also not allowed to benefit.
What's the hana from the Gid Hanasha? If you sold meat, we saw that there was a chashash that a yid would see it, would want to buy it from the goy. But if you just Stamazoi sold the hindquarters of an animal to a goy, the Gid Hanasha is not enhancing that in any way. It's not worth more because it's got the Gid Hanasha in it. So what's the hana that you're having?
Weight. If you sell it by weight, you have some additional weight there. You don't have to extract that. You don't have to diminish that. You don't have to say, okay, look, this weighs your hanging weight. It's let's say 200 pounds. The hindquarters, great. I'll take off 10 pounds for the Gid Hanasha. They don't say that. There's no prohibition and benefit. You don't have to extract that. And it's not a great tasting piece, but around it is good tasting meat, and
right.
And you don't have to extract it or diminish its value by saying, there's some part there I'm not allowed to benefit from, so I have to minus that from the weight.
But aside from that, if I went to the market and I said, how much for the hindquarter, and they said $200, so I'll give you $150. This got nothing to do with weight. It's got to do with
sure. But if you sell it per pound, you don't have to exclude that. The point is that you're allowed to benefit from it. You don't have to exclude it. Mm-hmm. In your scenario, perhaps that wouldn't be the case of a benefit from it in any case. True, but there is a way that you benefit if you sell it by pound. You cut it up into pieces, and you don't cut it out, and you sell everything per pound. However you do it, you're allowed to charge. You don't have to diminish. You don't have to minus off of the total the amount of the Gid Hanasha. Okay, we now have another prohibition. The Gemara is going to ask from the next one. Dam. Kvari dam. Blood. The Rachmana Amar kol nefesh michem lo yitechal dam. All of you shall not eat blood. Otanan. Elav elam misavim ba'ama. It says in regards to the bloods from the Beis Hamikdash, you have the leftover blood of the chatas and the leftover blood of other kabbanas, the outer chatas, inner chatas. They would all mix in the courtyard of the Beis Hamikdash, and they would do a washout and would run off into the river, and so they would all go down to the Nachal Kidron, and they would actually be used as fertilizer because this water now had blood in it, and it was good for the fields. Lazavil, to fertilize the fields. And there's a me'ilah in it that you're not allowed to benefit from the blood itself because of hektish. Yet you're allowed to have hana from blood. You're allowed to use it as fertilizer. You don't say it's prohibited in benefit and there's nothing you're allowed to do. So the Gemara says, shiny dam de iskish lamayim. No, blood is different because the Torah specifically calls it like water. The Chsifr, it says, Torah says, do not eat the blood, pour it on the ground like water. Just as the water you're allowed to benefit from in the ground, you're allowed to water your field, so to the blood, you're allowed to put it in your fields, and you're allowed to benefit from it by pouring it on your fields. So that's going to be a fertilizer. Well, maybe when it says it's like water, it means like the water that you pour on the mizbeach, which during Sukkot, which is prohibited in benefit because it's a part of the carbon. It's on the mizbeach. Amar Rabbi Abo Kamayim. No, it just said general waters. Rav Mayim. It's like the typical general water, like most water. Well, it says midi Rav Mayim. Why? It doesn't say the majority of waters. It says water. Ella Amar Avashi Kamayim Nishpachim V'lo Kamayim Anisachim. The reason is because it says like water that's spilt. It says you can pour it onto the ground, spill it on the ground like water that is spilt. And water that's spilt is not water that you pour on the mizbeach because that's specifically a part of the service. That's a libation going on the mizbeach, on the altar. What about maybe it means water that is poured before idolatry? That no, that too is poured nisuch, a libation, even though that is avodah zarah, as we see in the pasuk, that the pasuk says, and they will drink the wines of their own libation pouring, which is you see that even though it's talking about idolatry, it refers to it as a libation, as a nisuch. So that is how Rabbi Abo is going to explain that by blood, even though the Torah says you shall not eat it, it is permitted in benefit. And what is Chizkiah, who says, no, who disagrees with the Rabbi Abo's principle that when the Torah says something is prohibited, that it's prohibited even in benefit. And therefore, in this case, there was no need for the Torah to say that it's like water that you're allowed to benefit from it. So what does he do with this idea that it's like water? He's good. Chizkiah, and now we turn to 22b, Chav Beis Amud Beis. In regards to what is blood like water, like we saw earlier in regards to Tuma, like Rabbi Chia bar Abba said, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, how do we know the blood from a korban will not cause, it itself is tahor, doesn't become tameh as we saw, and it will not make other foods susceptible to Tuma. As we saw, foods in order to be susceptible to Tuma require that a liquid came upon it intentionally. The blood of a korban would not count as a liquid coming onto food, and doesn't cause hechsher, which is the idea of making something susceptible to tumah. Shenema, for it says, don't eat it, rather pour it on the ground like blood. So dam shenishbach, like water. So dam shenishbach kamayim, so blood, which is like water that you can pour on the ground, machshir, has the structure of, has the halacha of water, which is that it can cause susceptibility to tuma by making something huchshar, by making it ready and susceptible to tuma. She'einin nishbach kamayim, something that is not poured on the ground like water, meaning that it doesn't have that equivalency, einin machshir, that would not be like water that makes food susceptible to tuma. What is that? That's going to be a korban, blood from a korban. You're not allowed to pour it on the ground. You have to specifically put it on the mizbeach. So therefore, it doesn't count as something susceptible, as something as a liquid like water to make it susceptible to tumah. That's what it means. It doesn't mean that you're allowed to benefit from the blood. There's no reason to think you're not allowed to benefit from it, according to Chizkiah. Because he says, when the Torah says you cannot eat it, it means you can't eat it. It doesn't mean you can't benefit. So therefore, the purpose in the Torah saying that it's like water is to tell you that it causes other things to be susceptible to tumah if it is something poured on the ground. However, Rabbi Abo, who said that when the Torah said blood is prohibited to be eaten, it also includes that you're not allowed to benefit from it. So therefore, the Torah had to say that blood is allowed to benefit from it because it's like water. Okay, so we have another prohibition when the Torah says you're not allowed to eat something, and then you're allowed to benefit. Aver minachai, a limb torn off from a live animal. You're not allowed to eat that. Even non-Jews are not allowed to eat that. Don't eat the soul with the meat. Batani, we learned, how do we know that you're not allowed to cause someone or assist someone in transgressing a prohibition? meaning you're not allowed to pour a glass of wine and give it to someone who's a nazir, who's prohibited in wine. And you're not allowed to take a limb from that ripped off of a live animal and give it even to a non-Jew, because no one's allowed to eat that. Talmud lemar v'lefnei iver l'sitim echshol. Before a blind person, do not place a stumbling block, which means that you're not allowed to take this prohibited item that's prohibited to that particular person, even if it's just particular to that person, and you're not allowed to gift it to them. You're not allowed to give it to them. You're not allowed to assist them. That's a stumbling block before the blind. In any case, what we see is that there wasn't a prohibition of benefit. We needed a specific technicality of you're not allowed to gift the Eva Menachai to you're not allowed to give it to a non-Jew who's also not allowed to eat it, because it's a stumbling block. You're causing them. You're an accessory to the crime. You're causing them to sin. But that the idea of just giving it would be okay. The benefit you get is no problem. And therefore, what we see is that you're allowed to give it to a dog to eat, shari, and that's a benefit. Yeah, that's because Aver Menachai is similar to blood, and since blood you're allowed to benefit from, so to Aver Menachai, because the Torah says, be strong and don't eat the blood, because the blood is like the soul. So therefore, when the Torah prohibited eating a limb torn from a live animal to everybody, Jew and non-Jew alike, and the Torah says it is like eating the soul with the meat, and it says don't eat the blood because it's like the soul, and by the blood, the Torah says you are allowed to benefit from the blood, even though you're not allowed to eat it. So therefore, when the Torah said Ever Menachai, a limb from a live animal, also you're not allowed to eat, it also means, but you are allowed to benefit from it. So, according to Rabbi Abba, Rabbi Abba sticks with his idea that when the Torah says do not eat something, it means don't eat or benefit from it. And Aver Menachai and blood have a specific teaching why you are allowed to benefit from it. Not why, but that you are allowed to benefit from it. But in general, we stick with the idea that you're not allowed to benefit from anything that the Torah says you're not allowed to eat. It includes do not benefit. However, Chizkiah disagreed with Rabbi Abba and said, no, that's not a general rule. So if that's the case, why did the Torah specifically mention nefesh, soul, in regards to blood and Aver Menachai? If anyhow you're allowed to benefit from it, the Torah only said you're not allowed to eat it. So in what way did the Torah need to compare the terms of Aver Menachai, tearing a limb from eating a limb torn from a live animal, and blood? He says actually it's the other way around. It's not that we're learning Aver Menachai is permissible in benefit like blood, but rather we're learning blood from Aver Menachai, and the other way around. Ma Aver Menachai aser, avdam Menachai aser. To tell you that not only is a limb from a living animal prohibited, but even blood from a living animal is prohibited, even though that doesn't perhaps cause the same kind of pain, and it's not as crazy. And even if there was a bloodletting, which is a way to heal the animal, but since when it comes out, that it could cause the animal to die, and that is a life force of the animal, you're not allowed to eat that as well. Fine. So we still have the machlokes. Chizkiah says anything that the Torah says. Rabbi Abba says anytime the Torah says you're not allowed to eat something, it includes a prohibition of benefit, and Chizkiah disagrees with that. And now we have Shor HaNiskel. The halacha is an ox that gored 3 times and killed. Ox really that killed when it gored. It gets put to death. Right? It has to be put down. Shor HaNiskel. This is even before. Once the ruling came down that it needs to be put down, even before it actually is killed. If the owner goes ahead and shechts it, the Torah says you're not allowed to eat its meat. It says its meat may not be eaten. V'tanya, we learned from the fact that it says that it needs to be put to death. Don't I know that it's nevela? It's obvious that it's you're not allowed to eat it anyhow because it wasn't slaughtered in the right way. And so it's going to be prohibited in achila. It's going to be prohibited to be eaten in any case. So why did the Torah say that it may not be eaten? That to tell you that even if the Beis Din didn't end up putting it down, you yourself got a shochet quickly and ran back to your house and to the barn and just had it shechted properly. Nevertheless, it's not allowed to be eaten, even if it was shechted properly. But that only tells me that I'm not allowed to eat it. Well, perhaps I'm allowed to sell it. How do I know that I'm not even allowed to sell it? That the owner is in the clear. The simple meaning means that the punishment is, since he didn't know to guard his animal, he didn't know that it was it was wild, and therefore he is going to be off the hook. Now, how does that tell me that he's not allowed to benefit from it? Me'ei mashma. So from where do you hear over there that he can't benefit from it? Shimon ben Zoma Omer, he says, what does it mean that he's off the hook? He's in the clear. He's not going to be held liable, but he also has nothing left of that animal. He's been cleared out of his assets. This animal is not only prohibited in benefit in eating, it's also he's got no benefit from that animal at all. He cannot benefit from it in any way at all. Okay, so that seems to concur with Rabbi Abo. It's prohibited in eating, also prohibited in benefit. But according to Rabbi Abo, what I need a special teaching to say that it's prohibited in benefit. Time of the kasav balashar naki. It's only because the Torah said, and the owner is completely cleared, meaning cleared of his assets. He has nothing left of it. But from the word lo yeyachel itself, isra achila mashma, isra ano lo mashma, that would only have meant a prohibition in benefit in eating, but not a prohibition in benefit. And now this is true even according to Chizkiah, because as we saw at the beginning, Chizkiah said by chametz, you're not allowed to benefit. And how do you know that? Because the Torah didn't say lo yochal, you shall not eat it, but lo ye'achel, it shall not be eaten in the reflexive and the passive. And so to tell you that not only you're not allowed to eat it, but it can't give you benefit, it can't give you assets which you can eat. You can't barter it, you can't sell it and then use the money for food. And so therefore, even according to Chizkiah, the wording here is going to be the same. It says lo ye'achel. So both according to Chizkiah and according to Rabbi Abo, why did the Torah need to tell me that the ox that gored and has been sentenced to death and the owner shechted it, you're not allowed to eat it, and even the owner has no benefit out of it at all, he went out cleaned out of his asset, why do I need a special teaching of that? That's true just by the words lo ye'achel. So Gemara says, the imel lo ye'achel, and lost the spike in a second. Time of the kasav balashar naki. So it's only on account that the Torah specifically says that the owner is cleaned out. The imel lo ye'achel, but from the word lo ye'achel, is achila mashma, indicates that only you're not allowed to eat from it. Is ano le mashma, but it wouldn't indicate that there's a prohibition of benefit, and that contradicts both of these opinions. The Gemara says lo elam lo ye'achel is achila ve is ano mashma. See, you're right. Really, when it says lo ye'achel, both Chizkiah and Rabbi Abo agree that it includes a prohibition of benefit. Ubal ashar naki. So then why do I need a specific prohibition of bal ashar naki? Because I may have thought, and generally we say, when the Torah says lo yochel, lo sochlu, or lo yachel, anything that's edible, you're not allowed to benefit from. But the hides, as we just mentioned before, those are not edible. Now, hides are not edible. And since they're not edible, you're allowed to benefit from it. Because the Torah, when it said don't eat it, didn't include the hides because it's not edible. Therefore, the Torah said over there, Balashar Naki, he's cleaned out. He cannot even sell the hides. There's nothing here that he's allowed to benefit from. v'itzrach, and I need this specifically. Because I may have said lo yeyochel es besora when it says you may not eat the meat. Say besora in or only the meat, but the hides are allowed to be eaten or allowed to be benefited from. Kamash Malan, that's why Balashar Naki tells me that you're not allowed to, that the owner loses the benefit even of the hides. There is in the Gemara and Baba Kama has a machlokes, and there are those that learn that Balashar Naki is coming to tell me other obligations that the owner of an animal that kills is responsible for. Whether it's a chatzi kofer, whether it's to tell you that he's exempt of half of the kofer for it's a penalty or damages for loss of life, or demei veladas, or if the animal caused a loss of a pregnancy, that there's an exemption in that case if he didn't know that the animal was wild. So Hanas Armin, where do they know that there's a prohibition in the owner where the animal is put to death, that the owner may not benefit even from the hides? Minalu. So nafkalu me es besara. It says lo yachel es besara. It doesn't say lo yachel besara, don't eat the meat, but rather es besara, that which is with the meat. Es is an addendum usually. It's a word that really doesn't have a translation in English, but in Hebrew it means together with, as opposed to just and or the. It's something it's something that's connected to and a part of the item itself. So es besaroi, es atafel besaroi, that which is secondary to the meat itself, which is the hides. V'idach us es loydarish. And the other says, yeah, even though that S is a connection word there, it doesn't have to teach us anything. It just means don't eat the meat. And therefore, we need a Balashar Naki. We need the Torah to tell us specifically that the owner has no benefit from this animal. And where do we find this concept? Kedetanya Shimon Amsuni, V'amri Nechemi ben Amsuni, a very powerful teaching that either Shimon Amsuni or Nechemi Amsuni Hayidarish Kol Eser Shabbatorah. He went through a teaching to explain why the Torah used the word es in every single time that it used it, what it came to add to that term, because it means something with the main. However, when he got to the verse that says es, this connection, that's with which is Hashem Elokecha, Hashem your God, Tira, you shall be in fear and awe of Hashem. Now he understands having a sense of awe of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but a sense of awe of something else with Hashem, he couldn't connect anything there. And he said, all right, Piresh said, I step away. I cannot interpret this. And if you can't explain this one, all the rest of them are for naught. And what about that? He said to them, just as I get reward for drisha, for seeking and explaining each one of them, when I get here and realize I cannot do it and I need to step back, I get reward for stepping back and stopping my endeavor as well. However, Rabbi Akiva came and he said, he said, no, there is something that there is a concept of something with Hashem that would bring us to a place of awe and fear. It includes Talmidei Chachamim. There are representatives of Hashem, someone who's dedicated to learning Torah and to serving Hashem. Someone like that even is a representative of Torah, not on account of the person, but on account of the Torah that's in them and the representation of Hashem in them, that we respect them and show a certain element of awe of their representation of Hashem in this world. And there too also there's a obligation to have a reverence for them. And so he explained the word es also in a way that would fit. And so therefore, going back to our matter in es lo yochel es besara, one, like Rabbi Akiva says, that the es there too needs to be explained, and the lo yochel es besara would mean not only the meat but you're also not allowed to benefit from the hides. Whereas, according to Shimon Amsuni, who stepped back and said, no, I'm not going to explain the Esem because I cannot explain this one. So then Es cannot mean the hides. Therefore, Baal Hashar Naki is coming to tell me that the owner is cleaned out, has no benefit from the hides itself. But either way, the reason why not eating did not include the benefit, because you don't eat the hides. So I need a specific teaching for the hides, but indeed, both will still agree that when it says lo ye achel, it shall not be eaten. It means both you can't eat the item that the Torah is talking about, as well as you can't barter it and then eat what benefit you get. And that tells us a prohibition of benefit as well. We'll continue with this sugya of the Isser Hana, the prohibition of benefit,